So I wanted to welcome everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hillary Mahon. I'm the chair of the programming committee at KKBE. And this is our first brown bag lunch presentation. We have 2 more coming up over the summer. And we are very excited to have Mr. Jim Geiger here with us today. Before I introduce him, I do want to let you know that the program is being recorded. So we are recording our Zoom here. I am going to have everybody muted during Jim's presentation. And then when he finishes, he will leave time for some questions, and you can use the raise hand. If you click on the bottom of your screen under participants, you will then see an option to raise your hand, and it will indicate a blue hand on the participant list. That is how I will know to call on you that you have a question for Jim, and I will be able to unmute you. I hope everybody enjoys. So, a little bit about Jim. Jim was born and raised in Westchester County, New York, and he earned a BA from Collegiate University and an MBA at Columbia. He worked in securities trading and sales in London, New York, and Chicago for over 30 years. He and his wife, Marilyn, lived in Greenwich, Connecticut before moving to Daniel Island in late 2017. They have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and we are lucky enough to call him a member at KKBE. And this is his story of the events of 9/11. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Appreciate it. Hope everybody's staying well and healthy. I want to take everybody back to Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. I'm sure everybody here is old enough to remember, obviously where they were, what took place at that time, what their thoughts were, who they were with, what they were doing. My experience is going to be obviously very different than most of yours. I worked for a internet or financial technology company that was based on the 51st floor of the World Trade Center, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. My day started out on September 11th like every other day. It happened to be an absolutely gorgeous late summer day in Manhattan, not a cloud in the sky, beautiful blue skies, about 75 to 80 degrees. I take a very early morning train, commute on the New Haven Railroad to Grand Central Station, which is at 42nd Street, where I meet 3 or 4 commuting buddies. We meet at the exit and we walk over to the Lexington Avenue subway line, take the Lexington down to Fulton Street. We exit together because we all work in the Trade Center. We walk about 5 minutes down to the west side of Manhattan into the Trade Center building itself, pretty much into the subterranean areas where there are restaurants and coffee shops, and each of us grabs a coffee. Some of us go to the South Tower, some of us go to the North Tower, and that's how our day usually begins. And I'm at work probably by 7:15 to 7:30 on every morning. That morning wasn't any different. I was involved in covering a lot of major institutional clients that were using our system, our internet computer system at the time. So there were a lot of issues that went on. I was also trying to prospect for new clients. So there was a lot of work to be done before the trading day actually began, closer to 8:30 to 9 o'clock. People gravitated into our office between, say, 7:30 and 8:30, but the day usually got started full-time around 8:30. At around 8:30, I started printing out some information, and I remember around 8:45, I walked over to the computer, to the printer to pick up some of the sheets that I had printed. At exactly that moment, there was an enormous impact into our building. At the time, remember, none of us expected what ultimately was happening. So on the impact at 8:45 or 8:46, I believe the exact time was, all of the ceiling tiles dislodged from above our heads. So we had dust coming down on top of us. But the most dramatic thing for me was I happened to be standing talking to a colleague, and at the time of the impact, that colleague, in my eyes, moved 2 feet one way and 2 feet the other way. The building absorbed the impact, but it pivoted 2 to 3 feet in each direction. Exactly that moment, we were able to look out the south side. Let me explain where our 51st floor was kind of an L-shaped floor. My office, my desk was facing the west side of the building. So I was overlooking the World Financial Center, if you people were familiar with that, overlooking the Hudson River and overlooking New Jersey to my left. Our office continued in sort of an L, so it went around the corner, and the rest of the office was facing the north side of the building and towards the East River. Again, so we had 2/3 of the floor. So we had office space with windows on the north side and windows on the west side and windows on the south side. Again, on the impact, we started to see fiery debris coming down. You can see outside the windows on the south side. Again, the initial thought was it must have been a small plane crash. It was significant enough that we knew we had to leave. Now, our office was divided. I said on the north side was most of our computer technology people. They knew exactly what was happening on the north side. In fact, later on I heard that there were two people talking in an office. One fellow had his back to the window and the other guy was standing up facing him. And the guy facing him actually saw the plane as it was lowering itself down into the building. And as he was talking to the person sitting at his desk, he actually was physically getting lower and lower and lower, not believing that this plane was about to hit the building. Well, they all saw the plane hit the building, and they all left through the back exit of our office space. And I never saw them the rest of the day. We had about 15 of us in our area of where we were working. The immediate impact was to try to get people together, and we were going to leave the space. But we have into the interior of our office space had a technology room, a computer room. It was very cold in there to maintain the hardware. And there usually were 1 or 2 people in there. We opened the door, we made sure everybody left that space. So as a group of 15 of us, we went from our side of the building all the way to the north side of the building where there was the back exit. Each of the offices, it's probably pretty common in most places, an employee is designated as sort of the firm fire warden. He's trained to figure out, what happens in emergency situations. And he told us all to gather by the back door and then walk into the hallway in the back. He was then proceeding to a phone that was encased in glass, which he broke with his shoe, to pick up a phone that was security phone directly connected to the security desk on the ground floor. I can remember him, we're standing now in that hallway. He's on the phone asking for help. Is there anybody there? What should we do? As usual, the plan was to wait for instructions on what to do. As we're waiting, we're standing in front of a freight elevator. And these are gigantic elevators. I mean, you literally could drive a Volkswagen onto the elevator banks at the World Trade Center. They were that large. While we were waiting, we heard the distinctive sound of metal on metal just crashing down, and you can hear sparks flying. So when we heard that elevator crashing, we just opened the stairwell and we walked in. Now, as we were walking in, there was a tremendous amount of smoke already accumulating, and people were taking out handkerchiefs and scarves and wrapping them around their mouths. And I can remember speaking to one of my colleagues. I mean, this is really bad. Maybe we're going to have to get a chair and smash through the windows to get some air, to go back to the office, whatever. The fire stairs were already jammed with people coming down from floors above. Again, I'm on the 51st floor. The plane actually hit between the 94th and the 98th floor, and the exact time of impact was 8:46. And so I guess, what transpired was fuel from the plane came down all of the shafts, the elevator shafts, in flames, and impacted that area. We weren't impacted by that. We were impacted by smoke. We worked our way in as a group of people, and we were very fortunate because we maintained our group of 15 or so employees together, and that was very helpful because when we first got into the elevator, the stairwells on the 51st floor, there was a lot of panic. People were trying to push people over and run down the stairs, and it just wasn't going to be that way. So we were able to sort of calm the rest of the people that weren't working for our firm down and say, we're just step by step, let's get out of here. Probably one of the most frustrating things that day was the fact that I'd say in 51 floors, I could have run down the stairwell in under 5 minutes. This was an agonizing one step at a time. It was so crowded that it took, you know, you take a step, you wait 20 seconds to take the next step, take another step. It was very, very frustrating, to be very honest with you. We already were told when I got down sort of 3 or 4 floors to move into the right lane. All of us were told to stay a single file in the right lane, to keep the left lane open because they wanted to be able to bring people from above who may have been injured down. And they also wanted to leave a lane open for firemen to start going north into the tower, you know, going up the stairs into the tower. We started to see people being brought down. There was a blind gentleman with a German Shepherd guide dog who had another employee on his arm, and he was walking very gingerly down the stairs, you know, to get out. We obviously let him go. And then another vivid sight for me, a woman who had taken an express elevator. The Trade Center was 110 stories, and in order to get to certain levels of the building, you had to go from the ground floor to a sky lobby. You either went to the sky lobby on the 44th floor or directly to the 77th or 78th floor. This woman took an elevator to the 78th floor, I guess it would be. And when the elevator doors opened for her, there was just a wall of flame. And so she made an instantaneous decision. She basically walked through the wall of flame. She got to the ground, she fell to the ground, the elevator door shut, and I had no idea what happened to the rest of the people who stayed in that elevator. Her clothes were completely singed, her hair was smoking, she was in a state of shock, and she was brought down, you know, in that open aisle, you know, to take herself down. And I read about her story later on. She survived, you know, and she was okay. Again, we're going down one step at a time, and we're gradually starting to see firemen working their way up. Now, the firemen, New York City firemen working their way up, were wearing, you know, fire retardant clothes, very heavy overcoats with big helmets, carrying axes and all sorts of hammers and 75-pound oxygen tanks. And they're working their way up from the ground floor, and they're going up the stairs. And so it's an exhausting process for them. And so every 4 or 5 floors, when the fire doors were open on those floors, I noticed that there were a dozen or so firemen just sprawled out, pouring bottles of, you know, plastic bottles of water over their head to try to cool off. So for them, it was, you know, just an agonizing experience. One of the more interesting things that occurred is a gentleman, a young fellow from another firm who was walking behind us, kept asking the fireman, can he help? He said, is there anything I do? Let me hold your axe. Let me help you. And each of the firemen said, no, don't worry about it, buddy, just get out. Eventually, one of the firemen actually said, you know, if you can help me, that'd be great. This kid grabbed the oxygen tanks, strapped it on his back, and went back up into the tower. And I have no idea what happened to him. I mean, there's no way of knowing. I didn't know him. I didn't know what firm he was with. Now, at this time, my wife was home and really was unaware of what was going on. My son, who was away at college in Maine, Colby College, somebody at the development office at Colby College had visited me in my office a couple of weeks before September 11th. And the college knew that I worked in the World Trade Center. That information got transferred to some dean. The dean called my son and said, you know, I understand that your father's building was hit by a plane. Is there anything we can do? And he had no idea. I mean, he didn't know. So he called home. And he informed my wife at probably around 10 after 9 that the building was hit. It's the first time Marilyn found out about it. She's on the internet all the time, but if you remember in those days, we didn't have smartphones. We had flip-top, you know, cell phones that were just for telephoning. I happen to have a BlackBerry and one of the early users of a BlackBerry. So I had on me as I'm working my way down is my BlackBerry, and I'm communicating with her. I'm sending her emails saying I'm on my way down at 9:05, at 9:10. Not getting any responses, but I'm telling her, you know, our progress. And we're unaware pretty much of the scope of what took place. I mean, we were being told that, you know, it's obviously a tremendous accident. We want to get out of the building as quickly as possible. At around 9:15, Marilyn goes up to her office and goes on the internet and sees that I'm sending her emails. She then starts sending me the emails, which I'm getting on my BlackBerry. So as I'm walking down, I'm actually communicating with my wife. And she's telling me now the second building was hit. So I have this information and I'm communicating it to the people that I work with, you know, as we have a lot of time, where it's one step at a time, I'm able to tell them what's going on. One of the firemen coming up overhears what I'm saying and takes me aside and says, yeah, it got hit. Please try to keep this information yourselves. You know, it's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help us get out of the building. You guys just continue to go down. We'll take care of it. You know, he's an incredibly stoic guy. You know, but we all knew now that the second tower was hit, but no one really understood the scope of what we're talking about, the enormity of what was going on that day. We proceeded to go down. When we got to about the 10th floor, all of a sudden it opened up. There was like nobody in front of us. So we bounded out of the building as quickly as we could. When I got to about the 5th floor, the stairwells, I guess in most buildings, are made out of steel supports, and they pour concrete to make the stairs. The stairwells were disconnected from the building itself, so that when I came down at my size, I created a trampoline effect. I was just bouncing on the stairwells. It was 3 feet higher, just going up and down, up and down. That was another strange event. We got to the ground floor of the World Trade Center. Those of you who have ever been in that building, it was a 3-story atrium, completely covered in glass, beautiful marble, very, very light. I got there, it was pitch black. There was no glass in any of the areas I was looking at. There was about 3 inches of water on the floor, and there were only FBI agents. FBI agents wearing blue windbreakers with yellow FBI, you know, on the back. And they immediately just took charge, and they told us to leave the building as quickly as possible and follow. There was a cordon of FBI agents every 50 yards or so with flashlights, and we had to proceed to walk underneath the entire subterranean shopping mall, if you remember, from the west side all the way to the far east side of the plaza, and then exited the building that way. I thought that was strange because we just had to go 15 feet to walk out the Vesey Street side of the building. Later I learned that that was a place where people who were jumping out of the building were landing, so they didn't want us to go anywhere near there. It took about 5 minutes or so to proceed through what used to be an incredibly busy shopping mall that was, again, dark and very water, you know, full of water on the ground, until we got to the far east side underground. The far east side underground, and we walked up a flight of stairs. There was a Borders bookstore at the corner and a Century 21 store across the street. We emerged to beautiful sunlight, and there then was a very, very disciplined cordon, maybe of 50 FBI agents facing each other, creating a line, and just urging us to get away from the building as quickly as possible, telling us, please don't look back, just get away as far away from the building as you can, continue to go. We got about a block away, and now I'm staying in front of the Trinity Church Cemetery. So I'm at the base of Fulton Street, about a block away from Broadway. And of course, I looked back up at the building just to see what was going on. And again, the building was a glistening, beautiful silver building, gorgeous, on a gorgeous day, except there was this orange fireball that looked like it was superimposed onto the building. It was almost like a Bruce Willis, movie that it wasn't real. It didn't look real. I happened to be with a buddy who was working with me, but he also was in the World Trade Center in 1993 when there was a bombing in the parking area of the World Trade Center, and all the people evacuated the building at that time. So he looked up and he said to me, you know, it's probably going to take a couple of days before we get back in the building. They have to clean this up. You know, again, no one knew the scope of what was going on. So we were a group of about 8 to 10 of us. We now walked up to Broadway and Fulton, and I was standing across Broadway. I'm standing in front of 222 Broadway. So now, just to give you exact timing, it's now about 9:58, like up before 10 o'clock in the morning. At that point, we heard this rush. I kind of equated to just standing next to Niagara Falls and hearing this just massive roar. Looked up, and the South Tower was coming down. And when it started to come down, the South Tower actually pivoted so that it looked like it was going to create a domino effect. As it came down, it was going to hit the Millennium Hotel, and the Millennium Hotel would have crashed, and it would have crashed right into me. Okay, that's the way it would look. What happened in reality was it tipped slightly and then imploded down straight. Once it imploded, it created this carcinogenic, cloud of debris and dust that probably immediately emerged, sort of working its way up Lower Manhattan. It came up through Broadway. It was probably about 5 or 6 stories high, and it was just a massive cloud of dust that was working its way up. And I can remember walking into the lobby of a building on Broadway just to avoid this. I mean, that ultimately created lots of health problems later on. I exited the back end of that building, and with a group of people, we said, we've got to get off the island as quickly as possible. This is a disaster, obviously. So my thought was to go through the City Hall Plaza and try to get across the Brooklyn Bridge or the Williamsburg Bridge and just get to Brooklyn and get out of Manhattan as quickly as I can. As we got into that area, it wasn't quite as chaotic, and we ended up in an internet cafe. They don't have these anymore, I'm sure, but in those days, the way to get on the internet was to go to a coffee shop where you can buy time on the internet. We got to the internet, we got to the cafe, and our London office, we had a London office, was obviously still operating. And in our office, to be honest with you, our business was internet-based and doing trading. Our business continued right until a couple of minutes, maybe a minute or two before the building collapsed. I mean, the power was on, the computers were working. So when we got to the internet cafe, we took everybody's name down. We said the following people are safe and we're out, and we're, please, if you can contact our spouses or whatever it might be. And so we gave everybody's name. And so now we're sort of in the village, Lafayette Street area, in the village. We don't know what to do. One of the women I was with had an apartment like on 20th Street and 2nd Avenue. So she said, please come over to my place. So we all, walked uptown. But you got to remember, when this is going on, there's just chaos in the streets. All the office buildings from all over Manhattan were releasing their employees to go home. At the same time, the city shut itself down. They tried to close all the bridges, all the tunnels. All public transportation was shut down. I mean, I don't know why, but that was the first reaction. So people couldn't. I mean, I couldn't take a train home. People couldn't get to New Jersey. So we all went to this woman's apartment, and for the first time, the television was on. So the first time I actually saw the footage of the plane hitting the second tower, and it was hard to imagine. That was the shock that for me. I mean, of this event that took place. We were in her apartment probably for about 2 hours, just sitting on the floor trying to get ourselves together, when word came down that my New Haven Railroad was starting to run. So the guys in New Jersey couldn't get home. I was with 4 or 5 people that worked for us but lived in New Jersey. So I said, come home with me, take the train home. You'll come to my house, and then we'll get, you can borrow one of my cars and drive home. Because I think the Tappan Zee Bridge, which was in Westchester County away from Manhattan, was still open at the time. So we took a train home, New Haven Railroad train, and that train was an experience itself. I don't know if people know, those trains had 3 seats and 2 seats, 3-seater and a 2-seater. And I sat in a 3-seat, so it was 3 people in the seat, and between my legs, standing up in front of me, between the back of the seat in front of me, was another person. It was that crowded. It was just bumper to bumper people. They weren't taking tickets. They weren't charging you for that ride. They just wanted people to leave Manhattan. A lot of the people that were on the train were completely covered in soot. They must have been in the midst of that cloud of dust that came down when the Trade Center came down. We got home. My wife picked us up at the train station, drove home. Now, my wife had some friends who, came over immediately when they heard when the buildings had gone down. Because Marilyn really hadn't heard directly from me. She eventually heard directly from me when I was at that apartment, but she was still concerned, and my son was obviously concerned. We got home. Those guys borrowed my car. They drove home to New Jersey, and our company was essentially, out of business for a couple of weeks, and it took a while to figure out what was going on. So I'm sure I was in a state of shock from what took place. I lived in a place that was very high up in Westchester County, and I actually had a view of Manhattan. And so I can, from our vantage point, which was probably 25 miles away, you see the smoke for days and days on end. You saw the smoke. Our company hired some mental health professionals. We reported to a hotel in New Jersey about 2 weeks later, just in case people wanted to discuss any issues that took place, anything that happened. We had some interesting fallout as a result of that. We had a gentleman we hired who lived in Seattle, Washington, and he had just arrived and purchased a house for his family. They got the kids into school before Labor Day, and he's in the office with me. He gets home to New Jersey. His wife has his station wagon packed with the kids and says, "I'm going back to Seattle with the kids. If you want to come with me, you can." And he never came back to our office. He basically resigned and got another, went back to Seattle to work. We had several employees who just never came back to work, and the whole experience, the working there, sort of traumatized them. We eventually got temporary office space in a disaster recovery facility in Jersey City, which was great, and we were up and running by October 1st. So after September 11th, October 1st, we were fully running. They put us in a recovery space that had windows directly on the Hudson River facing the World Trade Center. So that maybe wasn't the best thing to do, but we saw what was going on, which for weeks and weeks there was obviously a disaster. They were trying to recover as much as they could from that site. Some of the aftermath as a result, about a year later, certainly more than a year later, I would say, I got a call from the city of New York that my briefcase was recovered. What they did is they took all the debris from the site and they moved it to somewhere, I think Staten Island or somewhere in New Jersey, I'm not sure, to a landfill, and then they sifted through that landfill to find whatever they could find. My briefcase happened to have my business card on it. They located me and they called me and said, "Please come by and pick it up." I had to go to the police location at Foley Squares, the City of New York Police Department at Foley Squares, Lost and Found. When I got to Lost and Found, there was a line of hundreds of people for Lost and Found. But when I told the people I'm here Lost and Found for 9/11, they went, "Oh." They took me, they got me right. I went away from that major line and got to a special lounge that they had built for people related to 9/11, because in many situations you're getting loved ones who are finding possessions from people that had passed away they couldn't find. So they tried to do it as nicely as possible. So they had a beautiful lounge set up for those people, and I was there. They brought me a garbage bag, opened it up, and there's my briefcase that had just reeked of smoke, and it had been sitting in a landfill for months, obviously. I brought that back to the office because it was a curiosity for people to see. And it stayed under my desk for weeks until my wife said, what are you doing with that bag? So there's the Museum of the State of New York. We contacted them and they were very, very interested. They were collecting artifacts and getting oral history of what took place that day. And I had two members of their staff came down from Albany to come to my house to pick up the computer case, and I got interviewed by them as well. So there's actually online, if anybody else wanted to listen to it, probably a half hour of interviews, again, very similar to what I'm talking about now with my wife and myself. My response, my wife and I kind of sat around for a couple of days, and then we went to Martha's Vineyard, which we had liked going to previously, and this is in September, so the place is pretty much empty. And we were at an inn for 3 or 4 days to try to gather our thoughts and figure out what's going on. But I didn't get traumatized by the situation at all, which is thankfully. But I can be honestly tell you that a day doesn't go by when I don't have some thought related to that day. I commuted with 3 guys who didn't make it. So that's troubling. I had my grandchildren here this week, and we happen to have a very, very interesting, 2 5-foot-long displays of the city of New York. There were artist renderings of every single building from probably 42nd Street down to the Battery, and the views are from the Hudson River, and one view is from the East River. And so my little 7-year-old saw it and was mesmerized by it, and my 9-year-old was there, and so I showed them the Twin Towers, which were obviously part of that picture, and explained to them, I was in this building, and the older one knows what was going on. Her parents have explained it to her, And, I'm just thinking, thank God, I never would have experienced this if I didn't make it. A lot of things have crossed my mind about this. We've had, why did the guy who owned the company rent the space on the 51st floor? It could have been, could have been on the 95th floor. Just so many, weird situations occur that, make people survive such a situation like that or can't survive a situation like that. But the most important thing I think for everybody though is that the hour that it took place. I was reading that 50,000 people worked in the World Trade Center, at the busiest time of the day, which would probably be, say 11 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There were probably only a fraction of that number at 8:30 when the planes hit. There would have been, we had close to 3,000 deaths on that day. 343 firemen died that day. They estimated that 12 to 20,000 people would have died had it occurred later in the day. And it would have taken 4 hours to get down the building. As it is, it took me about an hour to go, from the time of impact to actually getting outside on the street, which, thankfully that left enough time. I think if any of us knew that we were under some time pressure to actually leave the building because it was going to fall, and our building, the North Tower collapsed at 10:28. So the impact was at 8:46 and it collapsed at 10:28. There would have been some real concern, obviously. We were the fact that I was with a group of people that were very calm and controlled to get us all out. And the FBI did a great job. The firemen did an amazing job. And obviously most of the guys, I guess, who passed me probably didn't make it that day. It's a new thing. I've only been back once. I went back to actually see I took my kids, my children at the time, to the site. I can't still to this time imagine how those two gigantic buildings would look like today, a very small confined space. I don't know if any of you were down there before they built the new tower. It was a gaping hole in the ground. You actually saw the tubes from the path. They looked like little pipes that came out and didn't go anywhere because they were severed. That was an interesting sight. But no, I haven't been back to the memorial at all. Kind of want to, so that's in my past. I don't want to think about that very much. But no, it's an interesting experience. There's obviously a very interesting day for the United States. I'd like to explain it to you folks because you all had an opportunity to either hear it on the radio, to watch it on television live, and actually be probably mesmerized by what was going on for the 2 or 3 hours that morning. I kind of view it as being in a car accident, that you're all watching this accident. I'm in the car, so I'm not really aware of all the other things that are going on or hearing the commentary. Thankfully, I was able to escape the accident and, now in retrospect, see what's going on. But, so my perspective that day was very, very different. It's almost 19 years later. A lot of things have happened since, but I think maybe even too soon to sort of describe its impact on our country, on the world. It's obviously has had a major impact. It's kind of a Pearl Harbor type of event. I did have a war afterwards. I'm not sure we accomplished much in that, but we're still feeling the effects of that, obviously. That's pretty much all I have to say. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer them. I can get more detail if people want more detail.
Jim, I really appreciate you sharing your story. It's definitely very powerful. If anybody has a question, as I said, click on that participant button down there at the bottom of your screen, and you will see a button that says raise your hand. And that will indicate on my computer that you have raised your hand, and I can unmute you and call on you. Amy Davis, did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, this is Phil with Amy.
Oh, hey, Phil.
That was great, Jim. Thank you for sharing. Sorry, that's Amy's phone, not mine. So I had two questions. One is, it sounds like no one in your office died, and maybe you could confirm that. And then I was wondering if Marilyn would tell us a little bit about what it was like from her vantage point.
Well, let me answer you first. No, we were very fortunate that everyone in my firm escaped. We had one close call, and it was one from a younger employee who didn't get to work at the 8:30, but he got to work just when the second tower was hit. And so he was on his way into the North Tower at the time, and he was sort of north of the North Tower. And he rides his bicycle to work every day. And because he couldn't get near the North Tower because that was the first building hit, and there were crowds of people watching what was going on. At the time of the impact of the second plane, this gentleman, the engine from one of those planes landed about 20 feet from this guy. And the impact of the engine knocked him off his bike. And I can only, I had some customers later that I talked to who were in other buildings in Lower Manhattan, and they were describing the steel shards that were flying through the air into the sides of buildings, breaking glass all over Lower Manhattan. So that was the only close call that we had. We were very fortunate, obviously. Marilyn's got.
I did not expect to speak. I'm still in my gym clothes, guys. I want to say two things. First of all, when he says he wasn't traumatized, don't believe him. Obviously, I think you all realize that hearing his voice break. An interesting story about my kids. My son was in college up in Maine, and obviously following it, and the school was very, very supportive of him. He had the dean with him and so forth. But at one point I was able to call him and I said, Philip, I heard from Dad, everything's all right, he's out. And he said, put him on the phone. And I said, I can't. He said, put him on the phone. And I said, I will as soon as I can. And what Phil told me later was that he was convinced that I was in the car driving up to break terrible news to him, and that I was basically lying. And he did not believe his father was alive until he was able to talk to him. So, yeah, I'm sure the kids were traumatized by this too. Anyway, back to Jim.
Stephanie Zweben, let me unmute you? Maybe. Unmute.
Jim,
You should go. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Hi, Steph.
Thank you very much for this moving story. I just wondered if you felt that having ducked into a building to escape that cloud of noxious gases and whatever, if that saved your health, having the presence of mind to do that.
That's a very interesting question. Well, but what's happened since the Trade Center went down, there's a health registry that was created for anyone who was either in the building or a rescue person that had any impact by the collapse of the buildings. And so I think every 6 months I fill out a form that goes into this registry. The answer to your question, I knew to try to get as far away from that as possible. And one of the things I didn't bring up here, not that it was very helpful, but I had hiked Mount Washington for the weekend prior. And a friend of mine, we do this every 2 years, and it's the only time I do any mountain climbing. It's not really, these are decent sized mountains, but they're not crazy mountains. But every time I do it, I wear the same boots that I wear once every 2 years. And so I always come back with problems with my feet. And so that Monday, I actually was not at work. I had to go to a doctor because I was, I had blisters and all kinds of other things. And so on Tuesday, I actually was wearing sneakers, which turned out to be fortuitous because I had to sort of scoot my way through. One of the things I was with two women who worked for us, and they were dressed in those days as business professionals. So they were wearing high heels, and it was the worst possible shoes to have on a day when you're trying to move quickly. And I literally, because of the fear that was going on once I was outside the building, I remember dragging them, literally picking them up as I'm running, and they weighed 90 pounds or whatever it is, but I was able to lift them up. I kept saying, please take your shoes off. I mean, you can't walk. But that was an interesting side to this whole thing. But no, we occasionally, we just still stay together, and we're all at different firms now and do different things. But, on September 11th, I probably get a dozen emails from everybody saying, just thinking of you, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Mike Fritz, do you have a question? Let's see if I can unmute you. Hold on.
I can make a
go
comment to you. I have one of my sons that was worked in the financial district and was in there.
Right.
We couldn't get a hold of him for about 8 hours.
Wow.
And my late wife was just going nuts about it. This brings back a lot of memories. Secondly, used to run a golf tournament down in Hilton Head for 15 of his best friends around the country. And 4 of them worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. They're gone. And so that just brings back incredible poignant memories for me, your talk this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody? Oh, go ahead.
Marilyn is just reminding me, if you lived in any of the suburbs of New York City for the next 10 days after that, and probably for weeks on end, one funeral after another, it was just, obviously the bodies weren't recovered. They just decided, obviously, to have some sort of a memorial service, but it was, all of the towns in Long Island and New Jersey and New York, pretty devastating.
Does anybody else have a comment or question for Jim or to share with the group? I'm gonna look through. You can also wave at me if for some reason you can't find, oh, okay. Monica Farr? Oh, wait, hold on, I'm sorry. Wait, where are you?
There she is.
Let me see if I can find you again. I think I lowered your hand, Monica, instead of unmuting you. Aha, okay, there we go. Let's unmute you.
She's still muted.
We get it? See? Oh, okay, there you go.
Hi.
Monica, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing. It was such a crazy time. I was at Merrill, but I was in New Jersey, and my boss was asked to do the presentation at Windows on the World that morning. I mean, asked months ago, and he didn't. So they found a different CTO. So at Merrill, they had a couple of different CTOs, and they did. They found a Michael Packard at a different division CTO, and he's one of the 3 that we lost because Merrill didn't have space in those buildings. And then I had, I don't know, weeks, I had on my desk tickets because he was offered, because my boss was asked to speak, we had free tickets. And I just didn't get in on my regular meetings with my boss until the day before, so it was Monday. And I said, oh, here's one more thing I have to talk about. We have these tickets, what do you want to do? He's like, it's up to you. If you want to go around, because we were just out in Princeton, New Jersey, really easy trip. And he said, some people might want to go, totally up to you. And I thought about it, I'm like, if you don't mind, I'm not gonna, because it'll be a rush to best, laziest decision I've ever made. And I don't normally take the lazy way out, but it was like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to cause a ruckus. And, we all sat in watching, and because we were in Princeton, there were plenty of people that in the room that were like, my cousin works in there and my this, and you just collectively held your breath for, months. So I thank you for sharing. It's really.
You're welcome. I had a similar situation. I also had a chance to go to that. That was like an industry breakfast at the towers of Windows of the World. And I had a very good client who worked for Freddie Mac in Washington, D.C. Almost like a friend and a client at the same time. And he went to the conference. And I didn't know that until I saw his name listed as one of the people who perished. And I said to him, he normally would have said, why don't you meet me for breakfast up there before the conference starts? And we'll, I wasn't going to go to the conference, but he would have invited me to have breakfast. Just the fate. Just great.
Steph and Bill Quick, I'm going to unmute you. Or maybe you need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Hi, let me start. We lived in central New Jersey at the time of the event, and I was working in central Jersey. But my memories are 2 things that happened days after the event. First, the fact that there were no airplanes flying. We lived essentially over one of the runway accesses to Newark, and we're used to seeing planes all the time, but there was 0 in the skies. I understand there were some military aircraft up, but basically the skies were empty. The second thing I recall is related to our sailboat, which was at a marina in Hoboken, several miles up the Hudson River from the World Trade Center on the Jersey side. And when we finally got over to the boat and had a chance to take a look at things, it was just astonishing. The entire white fiberglass was covered with gray, and the
Right.
boat had a distinctive odor to it.
Right.
And it's so sad.
Yeah. Marilyn recalls actually when they shut down all the aviation, all the military, the jets started flying. And I don't know whether that was a show of force, but we had periodic, almost strafings of Westchester in New York by Air Force jets periodically throughout the next couple of days.
Fred and Vicky, go ahead.
Wanted to add to Jim's story. I was on, thank you, Jim. I was on 39th and Madison that morning. Just gotten home from Paris. It was my first day back to work. And we were locked down. We could not get out of our building. They did just lock up our building and told us they would let us know when we could get home. And about 2 o'clock, they told anybody that lived on Long Island to please leave now. It was very clear they wanted us out of that building. And a coworker and myself left. We got into the street, and my memory is that there were no cars. It was completely silent. Of course, I could see the smoke from that 39th Street corridor. And there were, I don't know, hundreds of people walking uptown. We were going downtown to Penn Station, walking uptown covered in ash, women with high heels and bare feet, carrying their heels, briefcases, clothing, everything was just covered in ash. And they all looked, I almost felt like I was in a movie, because they all looked
like zombies.
They were traumatized, completely like mummies. And they were just walking and walking and walking. And you couldn't even imagine how long it took them to get out or get home. None of them, I guess, knew that they could get on a train. They just, and later I heard stories from friends who were involved that they just walked across bridges. They went up, and crossed the first bridge they came to. So, it brought back a lot of memories, Jim.
Yeah.
And I'm
sorry. I knew that it was going to bring up some memories that weren't very pleasant for people.
Yeah, but it was just, then you didn't know what to do for the next few days. You just kind of waited to see what the damage was. We lost 48 people in Rockville Center. Cars were in the station. Commuter cars were in the station months. I was selling real estate at the time, and you would go to home 6 months later and there were brand new babies, that were in cradles in the house, and the closets were still full of the clothes, of the people, and you knew why the women were selling. They couldn't afford to stay where they were. Had an incredible impact on me. It's something that I still, on the anniversary, I still sort of just huddled into a wall and disappear for a few hours. But I do appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Thank you,
Jim. It's the second time I've heard the story, and the impact, I guess if I heard it another 6 times, gets greater each time I hear it. The first time I heard Jim's story was in a room of only 8 or 10 people, and there was total silence. That literally the old proverb or cliche about hearing a pin drop, you couldn't hear any of us breathing. It was so silent. The emotion that it brings up for me, second time hearing it, is infinitesimal, I would imagine, compared to what Jim, who says he's not emotionally affected, or Marilyn says otherwise. After 19 years, the impact is obviously greatly there and understandable. As a small addition to the story, I'm a dentist, for those of you who don't know, and I practiced in Long Beach, Long Island. And I got a call, this happened on Tuesday. I got a call on a Sunday morning from a patient of mine mine, wife, looking for dental records of her husband, Cantha Fitzgerald. Needless to say, I stopped what I was doing. I told her I'd meet her at the office. That was an extremely emotional and anxious moment for me to meet this lady who had to identify her husband through his dental records. I don't know if she ever did. Didn't know the upshot of that. But the impact of that event 19 years ago, as a lot of other people have shared, will be with us forever at different levels. And like Jim made the analogy to a Pearl Harbor event, I think it's an appropriate analogy for us of this generation. Thank you again, Jim.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you. Beth Almala Stapleton. Let's see if I can unmute you. Maybe you might need, there you go, Beth.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim, for spending time with us today. I was the property manager for Scholastic on Broadway between Prince and Spring.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got a call. I was driving down. Had I taken mass transit, I would have come in through the path just about the time the first plane hit. And instead, I was on the West Side Highway, and one of my engineers was out on Mercer cleaning up out in the back, and he called me on my BlackBerry and said, "You're not going to believe what I just saw." So he saw the first plane hit, and so I got off the West Side Highway. I was like, they're going to close that down. And I got to work just as the second plane hit, and I watched people jump out of the building that was VC was facing my building, and watched the tower come down. It was like, well, both of them, but it was like watching them come down on elevators. They were so straight. I was just amazed. But the interesting thing you were talking about, that the cloud, the wall of dust stopped at Broadway and Spring, and watching people come out through this wall just covered in white was an eerie and strange experience. My building ended up being we hosted, well, staged first responders for about a week after this happened, but it was pretty amazing. We took a lot of people in who were dazed and confused, and that was some of my experience keeping people calm in my own building.
Right.
So thank you.
Good story.
David Grossman. Oh.
Yeah, hi. I was interested when you talked about the shopping mall below the World Trade Center. I got my master's at NYU, which was a block away.
Sure.
And I used to spend a lot of time at the Trade Center, either at Windows on the World for drinks or getting coffee or whatever downstairs. I had been back there, and I went to the museum, which I'll never go back to because it's really upsetting. But then Margie and I went to the top of the Freedom Tower, and it was weird walking through the catacombs under the building. But then when we got up to the top and you see the view of the Brooklyn Bridge or the Statue of Liberty, which I remember, from years ago at the World Trade Center, it was actually very comforting. It was like things are okay if, you could see the same silly view of, these sites. So I'd encourage everyone to, if you're up in New York, to go there. And parts of it are really creepy still, as we all live through it. But there's also a sense of resilience. And I felt a lot of comfort, seeing the Statue of Liberty and the Brooklyn Bridge and the view of the Empire State Building, from where the World Trade Center was.
Hmm.
So, and also, Jim, you said you lived in Westchester. I lived in Armonk for many years, so we were probably neighbors.
I grew up in Harrison.
Okay, not too far away.
No, not at all. Pretty close.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you, David.
Stephanie Zweben, did you have something else to add? Hold on one second. It should unmute you. Maybe there. Nope.
Great.
this game of, there you go.
I just wanted to add from not a personal perspective, but from a sort of corporate perspective. I worked for Verizon at the time. I was headquartered in Dallas, Fort Worth, but Verizon's operational center at that point was on 42nd and 6th, but the old New York Tel building was right across the street from the World Trade Center, and that was all the switching equipment for all of Lower Manhattan. And Jim, you probably know much better than I, but something fell on that building. And by the time Verizon, years it seems like, we got that New York Tel headquarters back together, it was years and $100 million. So all of the switching equipment went down pretty quickly for Lower Manhattan. And unfortunately, we had 3 technicians on the 105th and 106th floor. I don't even think it was a floor. I think it was a telecommunications pod at the top of the building to keep all of the communications coming into that tower. And of course, they had no way to get down safely. So, awful. Thank you.
But there's lots of the debris and the from both of those towers fell on other buildings. Like 7 World Trade was destroyed just by the debris falling from the other building, or gosh, it got on fire essentially. And also as a result, the city at the time never had an emergency control center. You know, there was no place for Giuliani to go at the time. I mean, they didn't coordinate it. And they recently have completed a project. I don't know if anybody's been back to the city. It's on the Hutchinson River Parkway, right around where the old Freedom Land used to be, near the Montefiore Hospital, is about a 20-story monolithic building with no windows that houses the city of New York's central control station in case of emergencies. There's all these computer equipment in there, and it's sort of in a remote area of New York City, far enough away that, you know, it might not take, you know, might survive a blast in Manhattan again, that sort of thing. It's at the northernmost point of the Bronx, essentially, you know, to qualify for the city.
Well, Jim, I thank you very much. This was a wonderful lecture and a great way to start our Brown Bag Lunch series. Before we end, I do just want to give you a little preview of what is coming up for the month of July with the rest of our programming. On July 8th at 7 p.m. in the evening, Zach Gilbert is going to do a selection from the Great American Songbook. So he's going to be playing his clarinet and saxophone. And you can email Irene to get a link for that. On July 15th, our next virtual Brown Bag Lunch series will be with Jay Schiffman. And the title of that lecture is From Rambunctious Child to Substance Misuse and Recovery. That is his personal story. And that's also at noon. And then on Thursday, July 23rd at 7 p.m., we are having a virtual wine tasting. Those wines will be published hopefully in the highlights with July 1st. Scott Cohen will be leading a wine tasting and discussion. If you would like to purchase the wines that he will be showcasing, they are widely available and you will be able to purchase those in advance, or else you can just listen to him discuss wines. And then our last virtual Brown Bag Lunch series will be Dr. Brian Bosick on July 29th. And he is an associate professor of public health at the College of Charleston, speaking about pandemics in the human experience, past, present, and future. So also a very enlightening conversation, I am sure. And all of those, you can get links for the Zoom meeting through Irene. So I thank everybody for joining us. I think Phil might have one thing to add. Phil or Amy, did you have something to add?
Oh, Yeah, hi, am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Well, thank you, Hillary and Jim and everybody who put this together, Irene, and these things aren't that easy to plan and schedule, so thank you, everybody. I just wanted to say we had lived in Boston for almost 20 years, and so when this happened, because the planes are from Boston, everybody in Boston was just, the phone lines were just hot with people trying to figure out who was where and, which planes. And I was watching it on television and my phone was ringing off the hook, and it was just very chaotic, even from afar. I mean, I was in South Carolina, but all the connections I had in Boston were still very, we were very tied in. So, it wasn't only New York, the whole world was, in some sort of turmoil. That's all.
Thank you. All right, well, hopefully we will see you guys on July, let me make sure I got it, July 8th with Zachary at 7 p.m. I hope everybody stays well and doesn't lose their mind in quarantine. And we will be back together soon. Thank you again, Jim.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
You're yeah, there we go. Everybody's unmuted if you wanted to say goodbye.
Thanks,
And I was
Jim.
wondering, taking photographs of the hospice.
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Hillary.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.